this is an iHeart podcast. Guaranteed human.
Body Bags with Joseph Scott Morgan. I'm a child of the 60s. I say that proudly, and I mean a child. I spent my entire developmental childhood in the 60s, born in the 60s, Saturday morning cartoons, all those sorts of things that we did back then that, really brought us joy. But I watched a lot of TV when I was a kid. I'd watch Wagon Train. One of my favorite lines in any movie is Stand By Me, where the boys are sitting around the campfire and they said, they make this observation. They said, do you ever notice with the show Wagon Train, they never seem to get anywhere? And that always struck me as quite funny. But by far my favorite night of the week was Thursday nights. And the reason is that is the night that Gunsmoke came on. And I loved Gunsmoke. All of the characters, James Arness playing Matt Dillon, and you got Festus, and Miss Kitty, and Doc, and Newly, and all those characters, And so I loved westerns. I grew up around horses. My grandpa raised them, and mules, and I always envisioned myself as a cowboy. But that's make believe. That is make believe. It's a weird thing, I think, when our make-believe world is intruded upon by sometimes the harsh reality of life and death. Today, we're going to talk about the movie Rust. We're going to talk about the fact that Alec Baldwin has now been charged in the case involving one of the crew members that wound up dead. I'm Joseph Scott Morgan, and this is Body Bags. Okay, then, here we go.
Here we go is right, Joe. Alec Baldwin charged again with involuntary manslaughter. It all goes back to the fatal shooting on the Rust movie set. Happened in New Mexico. Alec Baldwin was charged last year for involuntary manslaughter, but those charges were dropped after 3 months. This time, he's been indicted by a New Mexico grand jury. Now, Baldwin was holding a prop gun in 2021 on the set of the Western movie Rust when it discharged. Cinematographer Helena Hutchins was killed, and director Joel Sousa was injured by that same bullet. Baldwin maintains he didn't know the gun contained a live bullet, and he has claimed over and over again that he did not pull the trigger. The charge here is involuntary manslaughter, and if convicted, Alec Baldwin could be sentenced for up to 18 months in prison. I know you were a fan, Joe, of Westerns growing up because you mentioned Gunsmoke.
I like Gunsmoke. However, my second favorite Western, and it's kind of quirky, from the 60s, I loved Wild Wild West.
Who didn't love Wild Wild West? Jim Conrad?
Yeah.
William Conrad?
Robert
Conrad.
Robert Conrad.
Yeah,
we'll go through all the Conrads.
Yeah,
but,
we'll get to him.
Who I really liked? I liked his sidekick, too, because he was a scientist.
Was it Artemis Gordon?
Yeah, Artemis Gordon. And they had the train that they'd ride around on. They worked for the Secret Service and President Grant. And it was just a cool thing. It's, I try to watch it now, and it's kind of hokey. I love the opening, though. The cartoonish opening. Yeah. So what was your favorite Western when you were growing up?
You know what? You're gonna laugh. You were talking about Gunsmoke. I've never actually watched an episode of Gunsmoke or Bonanza or any of them, but I do know that Burt Reynolds spent 2 years on Gunsmoke as
he did.
Quint Asper. He was there to replace the original. There's Festus, but before Festus, there was another guy on there that I guess was played by Dennis Weaver.
Yeah,
and.
Chester,
there you go.
Yeah,
and Dennis. But I remember Dennis Weaver as McLeod, so that's about as close as I'll get to a Western.
Yeah, no. Also, another good movie, Duel with Dennis Weaver in it. Probably one of the, and I think that's
Steven
Spielberg's very
Spielberg directed it.
and
Universal's
terrifying movie,
tough.
absolutely terrifying. And that takes place in the West. It's just kind of a modern day
Yeah,
showdown.
yeah, the daggone semi truck chasing.
Oh boy, yeah. It's
Oh.
still I'm still haunted by that. That movie actually traumatized me as a child.
Yep.
It was terrifying to me. I mean, it really was. But you know, who in the world walks onto a movie set and in this world that's very peculiar anyway and doesn't expect to walk back off of the
Right.
set? And it's a striking thing. It truly is.
Well, you know, the person we're talking about, the victim here is Helena Hutchins. She was a director of photography on the movie Rust, and she's the victim. She was the person that was shot by Alec Baldwin. Alec Baldwin, there's ever since it happened, since the shooting occurred, there have been a number of stories about what was taking place on the set. There is the armorer, which I didn't know that was a term. Okay, I learned it in covering the story, but the armorer is the person responsible for
Yes.
making sure the guns are taken care of properly. And in this particular case, you had a rookie armorer. Her father, a well-known, experienced armorer on sets all over the place, but not Hannah Gutierrez Reed. But it was Alec Baldwin, who still claims to this day he did not pull the trigger. For those of you who know anything about guns, rare is the case where a gun will fire without the trigger being pulled. But that's what he claims.
That's one of the reasons if when you're being taught, and civilians get taught this too, but I can tell you from my background, if you're taught in the military or if you're taught in law enforcement, if you carry a weapon, you keep your finger off of the trigger until you're ready to engage the target.
That's why there's a guard, the trigger guard.
Right.
Is Alec Baldwin being charged with involuntary manslaughter because he pulled the trigger, or is he being charged because he was an executive producer on the film?
Was the producer of a movie. I was an associate producer. So there's a hierarchy. If you ever watch credits at movies, there's the role that comes on after, and you'll see these weird names. You know, you've got EP, you got producer, you got assistant or associate producer there, and I think there's even an assistant producer. There's all these sorts of things, and they have producer on them. So the question is, you know, people beg the question, what do you produce? Well, the end game is to, you know, get the film in the can and get it distributed and all those sorts of things. In my case, I was associate producer on a film called American Outlaws. It's based on the true story of the Doherty Gang. As a matter of fact, there's a podcast called the Doherty Gang, and I was a producer on it as well. I went to set. I was on set, and yeah, because this movie actually centers around an armed robbery committed by three siblings, and they go on the run across the country. And it was an amazing story, a bizarre story. There were actually weapons on scene, and there was an armorer there. You know, the actors. I know that there was an AK-47. There was actually a handheld machine pistol, and a shotgun. And the actors never handled these weapons without the armorer being at their side. And when they were done with these weapons, Dave, guess what they would do with them? They would check them. And I say the armorer would check them, and he had an assistant. They would inspect them. They'd crack them open. If there was any, they'd take out the magazines. They check the breech, everything, and then these weapons were taken and locked down. And this thing went off like clockwork, dude. I mean, you could. And having not been on a movie set like this, I've been in, you know, studios filming shows for, you know, various networks and all that stuff, but I've never been on a movie set. It was a completely different world, and it is like a choreographed dance. But you know, at a certain point in time, if you're the boss and associate producer is nowhere near the altitude of an EP. The executive producer rules the roost. And if you are the executive producer on a movie, in the words of Harry Truman, the buck stops here. It's on you. So, in answer to your question, why is he being charged? Is he being charged because in his role as an actor, he actuated the firing sequence on this long Colt 45 caliber Western pistol, single action revolver, or is there more to it? Is it because he was in charge? Because he allegedly vetted, or his team did, everybody that was on scene or on the film, and they had his stamp of approval on this, that they were the people that were to work there. And I find it very interesting. I think that this armorer was a rookie at this, essentially. Even though you descend, hey, look, just because your dad was a virtuoso on the violin, don't mean you're going to be one, and it doesn't mean you're the top of your game. Now you can learn, you can apprentice, and all sorts of things, but this is the first time, or one of the early times out of the gate for this individual. They've made it very complex. The entire investigation, all of the forensics, everything is very complex. But I got to tell you, it comes down to one point. You put your finger on the trigger, you pull it, something's going to go boom. I found it fascinating, Dave, that the location of the shoot for the movie Rust is actually located in a town called Bonanza. It's Bonanza, New Mexico, where this happened. We were talking about, what did we watch, as kids, and Bonanza was okay. It just wasn't my thing, but it's kind of interesting, I think, at least as an aside. But when you see the set and everything that they had kind of built in place there, and the surrounding countryside, it looks like, John Wayne would have filmed here. I mean, it truly looks like a Western location.
New Mexico is an amazing state. If you've never been, I encourage you to go. There's a lot of history there. In the case of the shooting on the movie set Rust, mentioned that Alec Baldwin has now been charged with involuntary manslaughter. And since the shooting occurred, there has been a huge question mark as to who actually is responsible. Joe, that's why I asked you about the role of the producer or associate producer, because on a set, there are mainly 3 people involved in this particular, actually, there's more, but let's say 4 people. You have the actor, Alec Baldwin, the director of photography, Helena Hutchins, the armorer, Hannah Gutierrez Reed, and the assistant director on the movie, a guy named David Halls. I bring up him because David Halls pled guilty. He was an assistant director in this film. He pleaded no contest, to a misdemeanor charge of negligent use of a deadly weapon. He was sentenced to serve 6 months of unsupervised probation, and he has agreed to testify at upcoming trials.
There's also, we talk about Helena. There's actually another person that could very well have wound up deceased as well, and that's the director, Joel Souza, because he was struck. I mean, he was actually.
I forgot about that. I forgot he was shot.
Oh. Yeah, he was struck by the same round, Dave, that passed through this poor woman's body, the director of photography.
Okay, well, back up for a minute.
Yeah.
So you've got the director of photography and the director are standing in front of Alec Baldwin.
Yes.
The gun fires, and it goes through her first and then lands in him?
Yeah. And that's called an I'm not, don't get me wrong.
Mm-hmm.
I'm not diminishing Helena in any way about what I'm about to say, but just understand this from a scientific standpoint. She would have been the intermediate target, okay, as we're looking at it. So the round would pass through her, and then continue on through her, and then the final landing spot, relative to this would be the director, Sousa. And I think that listen, this round that we're talking about, Dave, this is important for everyone to understand. This is a robust round. This is a 45 caliber round. This is the same round that any of us that served in the military in the 80s, the 90s, early 90s, before they transitioned, this was our workhorse. This is a long Colt, but we carry 45 ACP in the famous 1911s, that we wore on our hips in the military, and so that round is robust, to say the very least. It's a lot larger, so you've got, and it travels at a subsonic level, which means below the speed of sound, but it carries a tremendous amount of mass with it as it's on target. So you can have a round like a 45 caliber round that strikes that first target, which in this case would have been Helena, and it can fragment at that point. You might not get the entire round that will pass through that intermediate target, but you'll get a portion of it sometimes. And then it still has lethal velocity to it. Those little fragments, as it travels down range, it strikes another target, and you wind up having to, first off, try to gauge the trajectory of this thing. You have to understand something about the injuries that took place. Where is her exit wound? And this is what Baldwin has contended, is that because she's the director of photography, she had him in a position where he is seated. And just to set the scene here, this is taking place in kind of a mocked up little chapel, like a little church, okay? It's got an altar, the whole 9 yards. There's a cross or crucifix hanging on the wall, and he's seated on a bench, okay? And what he alleges is that they were setting up for the shot, and she was trying to tell him what position his hand should be in, rotated to the left, rotated to the right, lifted or descending. What attitude should his hand be in? Because she's trying to capture that image when it appears on the screen. I think that many people don't realize how much work goes into capturing a specific scene in a motion picture, because every little scene tells a story. And it, for just the setup where you're looking at him, okay, he's seated in that bench, or on that bench, and he is literally looking off to one side of the camera so that he's staring at them. You don't ever stare directly at the camera, so you're looking to the left or the right, and it's almost like he would be having a discussion with someone. Maybe he's threatening or menacing them with a weapon as the actor, but she's trying to tell him where to position. And his contention is that he had the weapon, and he does a cross draw. The weapon, he's right-handed. The weapon is positioned, is holstered on his left hip, and he draws this weapon out. Now, the thing about this weapon is that it is a single action revolver. In order to make this thing work, you have to pull the hammer back, which is on the back of the weapon. It rotates the cylinder. The cylinder rotates, hang on, let me get it straight. I think it rotates to the left. So it turns to the left, and it will land on a live round. Now, whether that round, the weapon has to be checked. It can be a dummy round. It can be a blank round, or you mentioned the term squib. A squib is an explosive that many times you'll see them, like if you've ever seen the scene where Sonny gets shot in The Godfather.
Yeah.
James Caan had tons to say about that over his career, because they had 100 of these things on his body, and he was talking about how painful that, and it looks painful.
Right.
And these things are blowing up on you. So you've got that element, or something that should not be present there, Dave, and that's live ammo. And this live ammo is pure. It is a pure lead, what's referred to as ball round ammunition, that was fed into this weapon.
We mentioned you were as an associate producer on a film, and I think it's important to note this, because on a movie set where you have these different people with different roles and different responsibilities, Alec Baldwin has contended that he was handed a cold weapon, a cold gun. What does that mean to an actor when you say this is a cold gun?
It implies, well, it specifically states that's a procedural thing. Like if I hand you a cold gun and I'm the one proclaiming that it's a cold gun, I'm saying I've inspected this damn thing and I can tell you it doesn't have a live round in it. It's not gonna do you harm. I'm the armorer.
Now, you're telling me that.
I'm telling you that.
If I am holding a gun,
Yes.
just because you told me it's clean, I'm still going to check it.
You bet.
Because that's the rule of thumb with handling a weapon. And anybody who is responsible at handling a weapon is responsible for what that weapon does. The trigger doesn't pull itself.
No.
The gun doesn't point itself. That takes the person. And just because you tell me that it's clear, that's not taking my responsibility away. It's my job. I'll give you an example. We had at my mother-in-law's house, there have been guns hanging in there for years. As a matter of fact, I'd never noticed them before. I've been there, forever. And after years of going to my mother-in-law's house, I did not notice there was a gun rack in this area that used to be the dining room, mainly because it had other stuff hanging in there. But one year at Christmas, one of the kids grabbed it off the rack. That's when I noticed it.
Holy
there's
smokes.
and it was a kid grabbing it, and the kid was being with his father. There, I'm like, what are you doing? Because again, my children are in this house. You're grabbing a gun off, and what caught my attention, of course, is that they grabbed the gun like it was a toy. They weren't, and we're bringing it down at your level. And I stopped and I grabbed it, and it's not loaded, Dave. I'm like, really? Let's just look, okay? Just because it's hanging on the wall, you don't know who put it there. You don't know why. What if Pawpaw, who's now been dead 10 years, what if Pawpaw actually had that up there as his loaded weapon in case there was an intruder? He could grab it right off the top rack, loaded, knowing it's loaded, and could, defend his family. What if? It's not loaded, Dave. They had this, the kid had been pointing it before I even caught this, okay? So I grab it, I check it, sure enough, there's a live round in it. No telling how long it had been in there. No telling if that gun's still fired. I don't know. But the thing is that in a home where I was there with my children, somebody grabbed a gun off the gun rack with his dad present and was allowing him to act like it was a toy when it was a loaded gun. Somebody could have died in that moment.
Yeah, I got to tell you, I would feel, and I've been around guns since I was a very small child. I come from a family of hunters. And certainly all of my experience as a death investigator, been around lots of guns.
Mm-hmm.
And I never make that assumption that a weapon is safe on any level. If I can't inspect it myself, if you put it in my hand, I have to verify it.
Now, if I hand you a gun, Joe, I'm going to tell you it's not loaded here. I'm going to tell you that. But that doesn't relieve you of the responsibility.
Yeah, and look, I'd feel perfectly safe if I left you at the house with my grandchildren to watch over them. I trust you, all right? But when it comes to a firearm, I'm sorry, I don't. If you're insulted or if anybody else is insulted, if they hand me a weapon, I'm going to check it myself to see. And I would encourage anybody that perceives or takes a weapon to inspect it yourself. But this brings us to the point about this particular gun and this platform. It is what many people, they're not familiar with guns, but see Westerns, some people would call this a cowboy gun. And it looks that way. It's a revolver. It's got a...
Is it bigger than what we would expect from a pistol?
The pistols nowadays are... and they're in various sizes. You've got compacts that are out there, but and you've got full size. There's medium sizes.
Okay.
And most of the weapons that we see today are semi-automatic weapons, handguns, that is. Now, there are revolvers. There's still old school guys that carry revolvers. But this particular you have two types of revolvers, Dave. You have what's referred to as a single action and a double action. And it's important for everybody to understand that if it's a double action, you put your finger on the trigger, and as you pull back on the trigger, the hammer itself goes back. And the hammer is external. That you can see it. It's where you see people cock a weapon with their thumb. Double action, you can actually pull the trigger back. You'll see the hammer. You don't have to put your hand on the hammer, your finger on it. It'll pull back. And then when it gets to a particular point, it'll actuate, and that hammer will fall forward. And when it falls forward, it strikes the firing pin. Or some hammers have a firing pin that's built onto the surface of it, and it taps the back of the bullet. This weapon is a single action weapon, Dave. So what does that mean? It's not just pulling the trigger. It's a matter of you actually taking the weapon, pulling the hammer back with your thumb, and then pulling the trigger. But that's not what Baldwin said happened. What he says happened is that he pulled it back, the hammer went forward without pulling the trigger, and the weapon discharged. I think the FBI Crime Lab has got something to say about that. In forensic science, a lot is made, as well it should be, about the study of weapons from a ballistics standpoint. And when I say ballistics, you've got internal ballistics and you've got external ballistics. And really what we're focused on is how the round exits a weapon, strikes a target. Can we get any forensic data off of that round that is recovered? Can we match it back to a weapon? But here's something else that happens in a firearms lab. Not only are ballistic scientists or firearms examiners, not only are they really keen on the study of, say, rifling marks on a round, or say extraction marks on spent brass, or those sorts of things. They're also kind of like gunsmiths to a great degree, because they understand the internal workings of a weapon. You know, they have to evaluate a weapon from a variety of perspectives, but here are two of the most crucial things that they do. First off, they try to determine how many pounds of pressure it takes in order to actuate a trigger. Okay, so let me give you an example. If you take a weapon and you cock it and you hang it in the air, okay, they will, in fact, apply weight to the trigger. And dependent upon how much weight is required to get that trigger to actuate, that's where we get the term pounds of pressure to make this weapon work. And that assessment would be done on the questioned weapon, which, by the way, the FBI did examine. The other thing that they're going to do is take a look at the guts of the weapon. They'll take it apart and make sure that there are no elements within the weapon that would lead us to believe that this was a some kind of hair trigger where it would like easily go off. The FBI report that came back on this weapon confirmed that this thing's intact, Dave, that it's fully functional. So that leaves us with kind of quite the conundrum here, doesn't it? Because you've got Alec Baldwin, the famous Hollywood, and I don't know, I guess you would still qualify him as an A-lister. I mean, he's been in movies for years and years. I'm a big fan of Tom Clancy, and my Lord, I loved Hunt for Red October. Yeah. You know, saw him in that, and he's been in all kinds of movies. And let me tell you one other thing. Even in that movie, he was using a weapon. The famous scene where he's with Sean Connery inside the submarine. He's been in any number of motion pictures over the years where he is firing a weapon. Right. He's utilizing a weapon. You cannot tell me that you're ignorant of form and function when it comes to firearms. I don't care if you are an actor. It's not an excuse. You're a grown man. You've had all of this time on set. You know how the process works. So for him to proclaim that, that it was somebody else's fault, that he doesn't take personal responsibility for what happened, I ain't buying it. The guy's been around weapons forever.
When he was interviewed not long after it happened, George Stephanopoulos at ABC interviewed him, and Alec Baldwin said he was describing what took place leading up to it, where they're on the set, they're going through what's going to take place in this scene.
Right.
They've got to get the camera. Helena Hutchins is the director of photography. The actual director of the film is right there. And the reason is they're setting it up. We need to, it's not as simple as just, hey, grab a camera and film this guy doing this scene. Everything has to be set.
Lights, everything.
Yes.
I got to tell you, I saw some still images of the stuff that she had shot, and they're beautiful.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, she's obviously, or was obviously, quite the artist.
Yes. The thing is a movie set is a lot of hurry up and wait. That's why it takes so long to film a movie. Is it just to film a simple scene?
Right.
It takes multiple people involved and different angles, because you got to get different angles on the shot. Anyway, Baldwin actually said to George Stephanopoulos, he describing what happened, and he's describing Helena Hutchins setting him up, and she says to me, hold the gun lower, go to your right, okay, right there, do that, show it a little. He's describing, how Helena Hutchins is directing him where to hold the gun for the shot. In other words, it's not my fault the gun was aimed at her. She was telling me what to do. He said, she's guiding me through how she wants me to hold the gun with this angle, and I draw the gun out, and I find a mark, I draw the gun out, cut, and what's really urgent is the gun wasn't meant to be fired in that angle. So, and then George Snuffleupagus says, so if you're shooting directly into the camera lens, you're, Baldwin, I'm not shooting into the camera lens, I'm shooting just off camera lens, just off. And which goes back to my original point. You're on a set, you don't point it directly at someone, because film is not real life. You don't get the sense of the angle or even depth perception. It's all different. But anyway, he says, and this is what was important. You talked about how it has to be cocked. The gun has to be cocked. And I keep going back to this. He said the gun was cold. He said, I was handed an empty weapon. But he says, I cocked it. I cocked the gun. And he said, I cocked the gun and go. He said, he says, then I let go of the hammer and the gun went off.
Right.
I cocked the gun. I let go of the hammer and the gun went off. Well, the FBI proved that wasn't going to happen. Right. Isn't that correct?
Yeah, they did. And also any kind of jostling that may have happened. That's one other point. I don't know why it slipped my mind. I had to take, and I think that it's essential here. Can this weapon, and we have to consider all of the possibilities here. One of the things that the ballistics expert would have done, the firearms examiner, they would cock that weapon. And Dave, did you know that after they will cock a weapon, they'll actually drop it intentionally?
No.
To see if you'll get an accidental discharge on this thing.
To make sure
that, like what you're saying is, what your supposition as a suspect in a case is, the weapon accidentally discharged. All right. Well, the firearms examiner really doesn't have a dog in the fight. They're looking at the item they've been called to testify to or examine, and then they'll offer testimony, which, by the way, when this does go to trial, we're going to hear more about ballistics in this case than any case I can imagine, even compared to, I don't know, the Texas MacGyver case, Tex MacGyver case, Atlanta. Which it just went on and on. Yeah. And I think I even did an episode of Body Bags about it. So yeah, this is we are going to hear more about ballistic evidence in this case than any recent case that I think has been in the news. So, and you're going to have a firearms examiner that's going to talk about trigger pull. They're going to talk about pounds of pressure is required. They're going to talk about the guts of the weapon, whether or not the thing was actually functional. They're going to also talk about this idea if the weapon is that you can have quarter cock, half cock, and full cock. Can you get this thing to initiate by dropping it from a specific height? And all of that is going to be integrated into it, not to mention the recovered round that they took out of this poor man's body. where he was the wound up being, in the line of fire as well, the director. And I got to tell you, it's really a bizarre thing, where she is standing directly in front of him. I don't know if that's a common practice, that you would stand at the business end of a muzzle, not giving it any kind of thought. But even if she was, she's not holding the gun. He
Right.
is. He is the one holding the gun.
There were other crew members around too, Joe. It wasn't just her and the director standing behind her. There was a full crew, because the crew members talked about how the shot actually happened, and described Baldwin saying, "So I guess I'm going to take this out, pull it, and go bang." And that's when it went. And anyway, they described how when Helena Hutchins was shot, her last words, that was not any good. That was not good, is what she said. That was her exact words. That was no good. That was no good at all. As she falls into an electrician who is right there behind her, and they see blood pouring from her chest.
Holy smokes!
It was
I can't.
That's
a surreal. It's a surreal event. And Dave, this is not when these things happen and they're reported on, we think that this is occurring in a vacuum and it's never happened before.
right.
But you and I,
Yep.
we share kind of some of the same interest, I think, probably as it applies to film history and all that sort of thing. And we were talking about it. I think I was shocked when I began to reflect about this, how many incidences like this had occurred. I remember, what's this kid's name?
Brandon Lee.
Well, Brandon Lee, but
John
the
Eric
guy,
Hexum.
Yeah, Hexum. And that was back in '84.
You're right.
He had, and this was supposed to be blank ammunition, and it was, Dave, he had a 45. I'm sorry, let me rephrase.
So set the scene. Hold on. They'd had a long day on the set.
A long wait. Yeah.
And it had been going on. They're filming a TV show called Cover Girl. It was about these models that become secret agents or something. Some crazy thing. Had the guy that was on $6 Million Man, Richard Dean Anderson. He was Anyway, Oscar. They had a full day on the set. Everybody's exhausted. They were in their first season. This was like the 7th, 8th, 9th episode, somewhere in there. And Hexum they were excited because he was going to be this big star. They expected him to be the breakout star of this show. Good looking guy. Everybody said he's a nice young man. I mean, everybody's cheering for this guy. And he's got the starring part in the show, but they've been on set for 12 hours or so, exhausted.
Long day.
So he's taking a break on the set and actually is sitting on a bed, right? And he's just sitting there waiting and probably frustrated. It's been such a long day, right? But he's got a prop gun, Joe, a prop gun on a set. He wasn't filming a scene. It's a prop gun. And I'm trying to figure out why, maybe playing around, not realizing that a prop gun is dangerous, which I didn't realize how dangerous it was until you explained to me.
God, yeah.
What happened with John Eric Hexum and the prop gun when he's exhausted and just killing time in between the next set?
The story is nuts. I mean, it's absolutely nuts. He sits there, and I can't understand, still to this day, I can't understand why somebody in their right mind would do this. But just to set the scene, and so people can understand what type of weapon he had, it was a .44 Magnum platform. It's the same weapon that Dirty Harry uses. Remember, he famously said, being that this is a .45 Magnum, the most powerful handgun in the world, which, by the way, no longer, it doesn't hold that title. I don't know that it ever actually held that title. And it will blow your head clean off. You got to ask yourself a couple of questions. He takes this weapon with a blank round in it, and I guess feigning frustration, Dave, he takes this weapon and holds it to his head, cocks it, pulls the trigger, and discharges this blank ammo into the side of his head. Now, people think blank, and they think, oh, yeah, this is completely harmless.
Like a cap gun. Like a cap gun.
No, it is not like a cap gun. This thing has got a load in it because you have to give, even on camera, you have to give the impression. Now, nowadays, they could probably use special effects to and even in the wake of the Rush shooting,
Right.
they're talking about using CGI. Some
Right.
people are. We're not going to use any kind of weapon
Right.
with a load in it. We're
But
going to
this
use
is
CGI.
84.
Yeah, this is 84, man. When he put this thing to his head, it's a very interesting kind of injury he sustained. This is a gas fracture / concussive fracture. Matter of fact, it was so significant that when this thing discharged, it blew out a plug of bone from his skull and drove it into his brain. So a portion of his skull actually became a projectile, and it ended his life right there on set. And then I don't know how many
Well,
years that was.
Wait a minute.
84.
Do you think he might have been playing? You know how some of us will play around. We get frustrated and we
Oh,
like
yeah,
take our
yeah.
finger like a gun and boom. You know, like,
Right. Yeah.
you think maybe he was doing that? Like somebody was like, you know, it's been a long day. We're all frustrated,
Yeah.
and he just went like that. You know, like boom.
Right.
Think
I think that's probably what
Yeah.
happened. I don't think that there was intent here.
No, he
And,
thought it was
you know,
empty.
Yeah. And I don't know that even I'm not going to sit here and say that Alec Baldwin had specific intent.
Right.
But this is a negligent event. This is something that should not have happened.
Right.
And I think that it comes down to reasonableness.
Now,
And I guess it was 6 years after that. Was it 6?
9
was
years.
It
93.
9 years with Brandon Lee.
Mhm. I only know about this because I was actually in eastern North Carolina. I was about 45 miles away from where this took place, and it was huge local news at the time. It was
Okay.
it was huge local news that Brandon Lee, the son of Bruce Lee, who
Right.
had been making a little bit of a name for himself. This was his first starring role, and there were a lot of comparisons about Bruce Lee dying young, and here's his son Brandon carrying the torch, and he's shooting this movie, The Crow. They had high expectations for it. And so there was a lot of local coverage of Brandon Lee in the movie. And on the set, it was a scene where he gets shot. And it's, you don't film a movie in sequence. It's filmed
Right.
based on many things, but they were shooting the scene where his character dies in the movie and he gets shot. And, but what had happened is the gun that they were using was a prop gun, but somehow, and they actually, I've read this, so much more about guns and things than I do, but somehow in the course of using this prop gun, they had a fake projectile in it that did not fully clear the barrel, and it left a piece of bullet in the barrel in a previous scene, and nobody bothered to check the barrel.
Right.
And they reloaded it with a blank cartridge, and the blank did fire. But what happened is there was that small, it's called a squib load, which I actually had to look this up. His gun, the gun that we used to shoot Brandon Lee, it was a prop gun. It was loaded. It was a real revolver, but it was loaded with a prop, a dummy round.
Right.
However, there was a problem because the dummy round was improvised from a live cartridge that had the powder charges removed by the special effects crew so that in close-ups, the revolver would show a normal-looking ammunition. But the crew, they didn't remove the primers from the cartridges. And at some point before the fatal shot, one of the rounds had been fired and there were no powder charges, but the energy from that ignited primer was enough to separate the bullet from the casing and push that partway into the gun barrel, and it got stuck.
And they didn't clear it.
And right, by not clearing it, and by the way, this is an actual real condition called a squib load. It's an actual term in the movies, squib load. It happens. You're supposed to check the barrel. You're supposed to check the gun because these things do happen. So even with safeguards in place, Joe, they didn't bother.
No. And I don't know that there's anything necessarily foolproof in this world, but he was struck by this remnant that was left in the barrel because it wasn't cleared. And he's struck in the abdomen, Dave. So he's bleeding out internally. They have to remove him from the set, take him to the hospital, and he dies in the local hospital there in Wilmington.
It was sad because it was like, I remember covering this, that he had been wounded on set. It was such, like I told you, huge coverage locally. I remember cutting the news thing. Brandon Lee injured on the set. We thought injured, not a big deal.
Yeah.
He's in surgery. He's dead. It happened just like that. And boom. How is it possible, Joe, that happens. And you and I are sitting here talking about it all these years later. We're not in the movie business. We're not actors, but
No.
we know it happened to Brandon Lee. You're going to tell me that Alec Baldwin and other people on the set of Rust don't know and don't remember that?
Yeah, no, and even going back to Hexham too. I mean,
Yeah.
you just don't, you don't think. And look, I'm sure that, and we're just talking about the people that have died.
Right.
I can only imagine there have been other instances on sets, probably from all over the world, where people have been wounded. I'm sure relative to this, and I'm not saying that some great change has got to take place, but my Lord, man, you know that there's a history of it. You know that this can happen. You know what the potential is. You're actually handling firearms on the set. And still to this day, I don't know if it'll happen at trial. It might. I want to understand, and it needs to be thoroughly explained, that on the set of the Rust film, how in the world, among all of the 500 rounds they recovered at the scene, out of those rounds, how in the world did live rounds make it onto that set and into that revolver? I'm Joseph Scott Morgan, and this is Body Bags.
This is an iHeart podcast. Guaranteed Human.